The sun had barely begun its descent when I pulled my truck up the long, winding gravel path that led to my lake house. The air smelled crisp, a mix of pine and damp earth, the kind of freshness I had been craving for weeks. Work had been relentless, and all I wanted was a weekend of solitude by the water. As I stepped out and stretched, I exhaled the weight of the city life, my eyes scanning the cabin's familiar silhouette against the shimmering lake. But something was wrong. The first sign was the front door. It was ajar, not wide open, just slightly, like someone had been in a hurry to shut it but hadn't pushed hard enough. My pulse quickened. I was certain I had locked it when I left last month. Living in a secluded area meant I was meticulous about security, always double-checking the deadbolt. Cautiously, I approached, scanning for signs of forced entry. The wooden door frame had fresh splinters around the lock, jagged edges, as if someone had pried it open with a crowbar. My hand hovered over the door handle, hesitant. I reached into my truck, retrieving the handgun I kept for emergencies, my grip tightening around the cold steel. My heart pounded as I nudged the door open wider with my foot, stepping inside as silently as I could. The interior was dim, the only light filtering in through the large windows facing the lake. Immediately, I noticed that things were out of place. Cabinets left open, cushions tossed onto the floor, papers scattered across the wooden coffee table. It wasn't ransacked in the way a burglar might leave it, but it was clear someone had been here long enough to make themselves comfortable. A faint creak echoed from the hallway, sending a spike of adrenaline through my veins. Someone was still inside. I edged forward, my gun raised, every step calculated, my ears straining for more movement. The sound of hushed voices came from my bedroom. My stomach twisted in a mix of fury and apprehension. I crept closer, pressing my back against the wall as I listened. "Check the closet, too," a male voice whispered. He might have valuables hidden. I inhaled sharply, rage boiling beneath my skin. These weren't ordinary burglars. They were looking for something specific. My mind raced through possibilities. Why my house? What did they think I had? Before I could overthink it, I leaned just enough to peek through the cracked door. My blood ran cold. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed in casual clothes, stood rummaging through my drawers and closet. Their faces were familiar. Too familiar. My stomach twisted with disbelief. HOA officers. I recognized Greg, the HOA president, a smug, power-hungry man who had always treated the neighborhood as his personal kingdom. Beside him was Janet, the vice president, a woman whose entire existence revolved around making homeowners' lives difficult with endless complaints and arbitrary fines. The third man, Rob, was the HOA's security enforcer, though that title was a joke. He was just an ex-mall cop with a clipboard and a bad attitude. But what the hell were they doing in my home? My heart pounded with fury. The HOA had already been a thorn in my side, slapping me with ridiculous fines for things like leaving my truck parked in my driveway too long or not trimming my hedges to their standards. But breaking into my house? That was another level. I swallowed the fury rising in my throat, forcing myself to remain calm. I had the advantage. They didn't know I was here. I could catch them in the act. Slowly, I stepped back, moving toward the kitchen. The landline phone was there, but I hesitated. Calling the police now would risk them hearing me before I had the chance to control the situation. Instead, I reached for my phone and snapped a few silent pictures of them rifling through my things. Proof. Evidence. If they tried to weasel their way out of this, I'd make sure they had no escape. Then, something clattered. A lamp. I had nudged it with my elbow. The noise shattered the tense silence. All 3 heads snapped up toward the doorway. My stomach clenched as Greg's eyes met mine, widening in shock before narrowing in something almost like annoyance, as if I was the intruder in my own home. "What the hell?" Greg started, but I didn't let him finish. I stepped forward, gun still at my side but in full view. "I should be asking you that," I said, my voice cold and controlled. What are you doing in my house? They hesitated. Janet's eyes darted to Greg, as if waiting for him to take the lead. Rob stiffened, shifting slightly as though considering making a move. My grip on the gun tightened, my muscles coiled, ready. Greg, ever the smooth talker, forced a laugh. Whoa, let's not get dramatic. We were just conducting a routine HOA inspection. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Routine inspection? Breaking and entering isn't part of any HOA policy I've ever heard of. Janet crossed her arms, her face twisting into a scowl. You've ignored multiple HOA notices about violations on this property. We had no choice but to come check ourselves. My vision burned red with fury. No choice? You broke into my home. Rob took a step forward, his hands raised as if he was the one calming me down. Listen, man, let's just talk this through. No need to wave that thing around. His eyes flicked to my gun. I exhaled slowly, barely containing my rage. I was outnumbered, but I wasn't outmatched. They had made a huge mistake assuming I was weak, that I'd just roll over like the rest of the neighborhood. A deep, simmering rage settled. I was weak, that I'd just roll over like the rest of the neighborhood. A deep, simmering rage settled in my chest. I wasn't going to let this slide. Greg was still smirking like he had the upper hand, but his eyes darted toward my gun more than once. His confidence was artificial, a mask for the fact that he and his little HOA gang had just been caught committing a crime. Janet and Rob stood stiffly beside him, their postures tense. They weren't scared yet, not truly, but I could see the discomfort growing by the second. That was good. They should be scared. You need to calm down, Greg said, raising his hand slightly. Nobody here is a criminal. We're just enforcing HOA policies. That's all. I scoffed, the laugh coming out sharper than I intended. Policies? What policy justifies breaking into someone's home? Janet's lip curled. Your dock is an eyesore, for one. We sent multiple violation notices about it needing repairs. My jaw clenched. The dock? They broke in because of my dock. Greg took a step forward, his voice laced with condescension. Look, we were just here to document the violations and make sure you weren't ignoring them. It's part of our duty. I exhaled slowly, gripping my gun just a little tighter. Your duty? Your duty is to enforce neighborhood bylaws, not commit breaking and entering. My voice hardened. So, why don't you tell me the real reason you're here before I call the cops and have you all arrested? That got to them. Greg's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and Janet's face paled. Rob, however, seemed to have a different idea. His hand twitched slightly toward his hip. A weapon? No! He wouldn't be that stupid, right? I wasn't about to take any chances. Before he could react, I took 2 quick steps forward and kicked the door shut behind me. The loud boom echoed through the house, sealing them inside. Rob instinctively moved, reaching into his jacket. That was all I needed to see. Without hesitation, I lunged. I grabbed his wrist, twisting it sharply. He let out a strangled grunt as I forced his arm behind his back, shoving him against the wooden dresser in the center of the room. A metallic clang hit the floor. A knife! This idiot had actually brought a knife into my house. My knee pressed into his lower back, keeping him restrained. You were saying? I growled. Hey, what the hell are you doing? Greg barked, his earlier smugness gone. He took a step forward, but I didn't even have to look at him to know he wasn't about to risk jumping me. Rob struggled, gritting his teeth. Let me go, you son of a... I yanked his arm higher, making him gasp in pain. Shut up. My head snapped toward Greg and Janet. Both of you against the wall. Now... Janet hesitated, her face twisted in a mix of fury and panic. You can't do this, she spat. You broke into my home. I can do whatever the hell I want, I snapped back. Wall. Now. Greg and Janet exchanged a look, silently debating whether they could take me. I didn't give them the chance to decide. I stepped back just enough to press my gun into Rob's side. His body went stiff. "I won't ask again," I warned. That did it. Janet scurried toward the wall, her breathing heavy, hands raised slightly in surrender. Greg followed, slower, still trying to act like he was in control. I looked around, thinking fast. The house was small, only a living room, kitchen, and a single bedroom. But that worked in my favor. I needed a way to restrain them until the police arrived. Then I saw it. The thick bundle of zip ties I kept in a drawer near the fireplace. "Hands behind your backs," I ordered. Greg scoffed. "This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea who I am?" "Yeah," I muttered, grabbing the zip ties. "You're the idiot who's about to spend the night in jail." I moved fast, securing Rob first since he was the biggest threat. His wrists were thick, but the zip ties held firm. He thrashed, cursing under his breath, but he wasn't getting out of them. Janet was next. She whimpered as I tightened the plastic restraints around her wrists, glaring at me like I had just committed a crime instead of them. Greg, however, had a different idea. The moment I reached for him, he lunged. I barely dodged in time, his shoulder grazing my ribcage. I stumbled back, my grip on the gun slipping for just a second. That was all he needed. Greg grabbed the back of my shirt, yanking me off balance. I hit the floor hard, my gun skidding across the wooden planks. For a split second, panic surged through me. Then instinct took over. Greg lunged for the weapon, but I kicked out, knocking his legs out from under him. He crashed down beside me with a thud. I scrambled to my feet, but so did he. For a guy who spent most of his time sitting in HOA meetings, Greg was faster than I expected. He threw a punch, aiming for my jaw. I ducked, his fist barely missing my ear. Enough was enough. I pivoted, slamming my elbow into his gut. He let out a wheeze, doubling over. Wasting no time, I grabbed the last zip tie and forced his arms behind his back, yanking the plastic tight. Greg growled in protest. "You're making a mistake." I grabbed my gun from the floor, standing over him. "No, you did." The room was silent except for their heavy breathing. Janet sniffled, her face red with frustration and embarrassment. Rob had stopped struggling, clearly realizing that fighting was pointless. Greg sat on his knees, glaring at me with the kind of rage only a man with a bruised ego could muster. I took a step back, exhaling sharply. My hands were still shaking from the adrenaline, but I pushed the feeling down. I had control of the situation now. "Here's how this is going to go," I said, my voice steady. "I'm calling the cops. You're going to sit here like the criminals you are until they arrive." And then I leaned down, lowering my voice. "You're going to explain why 3 HOA officials thought it was a good idea to commit a felony." Greg's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. I grabbed my phone, dialing 911. The moment the dispatcher answered, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle into my bones. This wasn't just a minor dispute. This was going to change everything, and I was going to make damn sure they paid for it. As the phone rang in my ear, the 3 restrained HOA officers sat in a tense silence. The weight of what had just transpired hung in the air like a thunderstorm about to break. My fingers tightened around my phone as the dispatcher's voice crackled through the speaker. 911, what's your emergency?" I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "I need police at my residence immediately. 3 individuals broke into my home. I have them restrained." There was a pause, and then the dispatcher's voice returned, cautious but professional. "Are the intruders still in your home?" "Yes." My eyes flicked to Greg, Janet, and Rob, each of them glaring at me with varying degrees of anger, embarrassment, and frustration. "They're tied up." I disarmed one of them. He had a knife. Another pause, then a sharper, more urgent tone. "Are you armed, sir?" I glanced at the gun still in my grip. "Yes." "I'm the homeowner, and I had to defend myself." "Understood. Officers are en route. I need you to put your weapon in a secure place before they arrive, and I need you to stay on the line." I exhaled, nodding even though she couldn't see me. Fine. I moved to the kitchen, opened a drawer, and placed a gun inside. It was close enough that I could reach it if things got out of hand, but out of sight, so the cops wouldn't immediately assume I was a threat. ETA on those officers? I asked. About 10 minutes. Stay where you are. I hung up, turning back to my prisoners. Greg scoffed. You're making a big mistake. I folded my arms. That's funny. I was just about to say the same thing to you. Janet let out a humorless laugh, her eyes still red-rimmed from frustration. We weren't trying to steal anything, you idiot. We're the HOA. We were investigating a violation. You broke into my house. My voice was like steel. And you expect to talk your way out of this? Greg straightened as much as his restraints allowed, his voice shifting into something more authoritative. This is all a misunderstanding. Let us go, and we can handle this privately. I let out a slow, dangerous laugh. Privately? So you can sweep this under the rug? So you can keep bullying the people in this neighborhood like you own them? Greg's jaw clenched, but he didn't deny it. That's what I thought. Rob, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke. Look, man, I don't want any trouble. I was just following orders. I turned my glare on him. Following orders? So if Greg here told you to break into someone else's house, you do it. Rob hesitated, his face twitching with guilt. Save it. The room fell into silence again, each of them stewing in their own thoughts. I knew what was happening. Greg was trying to come up with a legal loophole. Janet was wallowing in her wounded pride, and Rob was realizing he had hitched his wagon to the wrong people. Good. A distant siren pierced the quiet, growing louder by the second. Greg's face darkened. Janet stiffened. Rob closed his eyes briefly, exhaling sharply. This is your last chance, Greg said, his voice lower now. Let us go. Say, this was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. I narrowed my eyes. Not a chance. The red and blue lights flashed through the windows as two police cruisers pulled up in front of my house. Doors opened. Heavy boots hit the ground. I stepped forward and unlatched the front door, raising my hand slightly to show I was unarmed. In here, I called. Two officers entered, weapons drawn, their gazes snapping from me to the three bound individuals on the floor. Sir, step away from them, one of them ordered. I did as told, keeping my hands visible. I'm the homeowner. They broke in. The lead officer, a grizzled-looking man with a nameplate that read Sergeant Holloway, assessed the scene quickly. His gaze landed on the knife lying on the floor near Rob, then flicked up to me. Are you injured? No, I gestured toward the trio. I caught them breaking into my house. One of them was armed. I restrained them and called you. Holloway's partner, a younger officer, moved forward and checked Greg's restraints before pulling out a pocket knife and slicing through them. Sir, stand up slowly. Greg scowled but obeyed, rubbing his wrists. Officer, this is a huge misunderstanding. We're with the HOA. Holloway didn't look impressed. You're also trespassers. He turned to me. Do you have security cameras? I nodded. Front door and back porch. They should have caught everything. Good. He gestured to his partner. Check the footage. Greg's smirk returned, though it was more nervous than before. We weren't stealing anything, just checking the property. Holloway's sharp eyes landed on him. Without permission, Greg opened his mouth, closed it, then settled on a stiff nod. The younger officer returned with my tablet, playing back the footage. It clearly showed Greg, Janet, and Rob forcing the door open, entering with purpose and rifling through my things. Holloway watched in silence, his expression unreadable. Then he turned to me. Do you want to press charges? Greg went rigid. Now! Wait a minute. Absolutely, I said, cutting him off. Janet let out a small noise of disbelief. You can't be serious. Holloway pulled out his cuffs. Ma'am, you are under arrest for breaking and entering. Panic flashed across her face. "You can't." Rob simply sighed, offering his wrists. Greg, however, took a step back. "This is ridiculous. I'll have your badge for this." Holloway didn't flinch. "You can take that up with the judge." Greg's face twisted with rage, but he didn't resist as the cuffs clicked into place. The next 10 minutes were a blur of paperwork, statements, and silent glares from the HOA members as they were led outside. Neighbors had gathered, watching the spectacle unfold. Murmurs spread through the crowd. By the time the officers drove off, I could already tell. The HOA's reign of terror was over. I stood on my porch, exhaling as the adrenaline slowly faded. My house was a mess, my front door was damaged, and I was sure the next few weeks would be a legal nightmare. But for the first time in a long time, I felt something close to satisfaction. They had pushed too far, and now, they were going to pay for it.